Welcome in, everyone. I really appreciate you being here, and I'm so excited that you're here. If you have not been to one of our webinars yet, my name is Meredith, and I am the Vice President of Practice Success here at DentalEMR. And in today's webinar, it's part of our ongoing episodes and kind of efforts to bring practical industry insights to our endodontic community. And one topic in particular that continues to come up for our practices and clients is merchant services. So, you've got to have it in your business, but it can be really tough to find clear and straightforward information. And that could be anything from, the different fee structures to how various tools really impact your collections and cash flow. And as someone who works very closely with our clients to establish strategies for long-term financial health, I'm very excited to have the Blueswipe team join us today. Now, just a little bit of background. Blueswipe has been serving the healthcare provider industry for more than 10 years, improving operational efficiency and cash flow, of course. And the team at Blueswipe has been so instrumental in helping educate our customers and our team that we have decided to proudly partner with them. They are one of the few integrated partners we've chosen for DentalEMR. So that means our DentalEMR customers can now benefit from our integrated payment workflow. Now, today we have two guests from Blueswipe joining us. We have Tim, who is the founder and CEO, and we also have Forrest, who is their head of growth. They're going to be walking us through the fundamentals so we can find the best solution for your practice, or at least give you an idea so you know where to start looking and how to dig in. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. So if you feel any questions that are popping up, you are welcome to pop them into the chat. I will be monitoring that as we go, and we'll set aside some time later on today to answer those so that way we can get your questions all squared away. It looks like we are good to move on forward. So Tim, Forrest, thank you guys so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And Forrest, we're going to just let you get us started. And I know you and I have discussed quite a bit recently of the merchant service changes that have happened in the last, I'd say, year, maybe predominantly in the last 6 months or so. And I'd love to hear what questions you are prompting, practices and practice owners to initiate conversations and learn about their needs and the merchant services.
Yeah, great question. And you, Meredith, thanks for having us on. We're super excited to be here. We started our conversations, I think it's been over a year ago since we were first introduced, and it has taken this long to finally have this webinar with all the guests on. So we're super happy to be here. And also, Meredith, in addition to the Super Bowl this weekend, the Waste Management Golf Tournament, and I think the Winter Olympics start this weekend. So it's like
Me too. I don't know how we're in Winter Olympics already. It feels like the Summer Olympics were just here, but that's
really
crazy.
Well, yeah, great introductions. Tim and I have both been in payments a long, long time. We've helped retailers, restaurants, but primarily we help healthcare. So dental and endo is really our specialty. And when we're talking to practices, one of the first things we do is try and figure out when's the last time you've really reviewed your processing statement. When have you really read your entire processing statement, looked at your fees? If fees changed this month, if they changed last month, if they changed in the last 6 months, would you actually notice, right? Other than looking at the amount processed or the total fees, calculate your effective rate, look at your line item fees in the bottom of your statement. Are you getting charged a new annual fee? So really see what you're being charged. We always pose this questions, are payments making your day easier? Or are they creating more follow-ups after the patient leaves? So those are kind of the few things we always start with when we're talking to a practice.
Yeah, I might even add on to that too. Like we definitely lead with education first. Fees matter because they can steal profit margin unnecessarily. But the workflow, I think the visibility of fees, which maybe we can talk about in a little bit, as well as follow-up is where I feel like a lot of practices feel pain. So yeah, I mean, fees alone don't tell the full story. And a lot of times you hear conversations around rate. That's something that you're often going to be aware of. Is, okay, what rate am I paying? However, I think the bigger picture is what's the total cost of credit card processing. And unlike maybe other expenses such as like a cell phone or a software, credit card processing isn't a fixed price. It's not just a $250 a month expense or a $2,500 a month expense where you can really manage around that. It's variable, and then many times there's additional fees that can get added on by processors silently that all of a sudden starts to seal some profit margin because you don't really have profit, you don't have visibility into it. And so if anyone's ever had credit card processing for a number of years, you know that you can have all of a sudden you can look at your statement and you see a fee that's been on there for 6 months, and you're wondering at the end of the month, like, why are we not as profitable as we would want to be? And credit card processing can be one of those kind of silent margin stealers. And so it's really important to know what it is, what it is you're paying, and have good visibility into it.
Yeah, I think that's huge because honestly, I can tell you firsthand, we have clients who often ask about these questions. And I know even my personal perspective of merchant services was that you basically just have the per transactional rates. Like, why would there be extra fees tacked on or other things that you have to worry about? Typically, with merchant services being a pay-as-you-go service, or at least that's how my brain and I think many people think of merchant services, right? Is like you just pay as you go. So the risk is pretty small, but then you realize that there are these other fees. And Forrest, I was really surprised when you were telling me about those fees that can be tacked on. Do you have some examples of some of those fees that you see or have been seeing lately that have been getting kind of silently added in?
Yes, I do. And there are a lot of them. I'll actually back up a minute. I mean, you asked what we typically or how we start the conversation with practices. A big
Yeah.
question we get is, well, what is your rate? And, we like to take a bigger holistic view to say, yeah, our rate's one thing, but if we can help you collect a little quicker, if your patients have less outstanding balances, if you send, fewer monthly statements out every month, that's going to save time. Time is money. So our rate is one thing. But if we allow these patients a lot easier and more convenient ways to pay, you're collecting your balances a lot quicker, your cash flows are a lot better, and we're helping you reduce your AR. So there's a few different ways to look at, pricing. And so the rate is really, really a small piece when we're talking to, healthcare, dental, and endo practices. Um, but I do have some examples of these fees. I'm looking at my screen up here because there's a long list of them. We've been tracking, hidden fees, annual fees, or fees that are newly implemented by some other providers and some larger processors out there, really over the last, 12, 18, 24 months. And so some of these examples I'll go over pretty in depth are, I will name some names. This isn't to say they're bad companies by any means, but there are some
No
fees.
disparagement is taking place right now.
Should I not name the names?
Maybe.
Uh, these are just the ones we've been tracking. And so Heartland Payments, they're a pretty popular name out there. They increased their annual reporting fee to $499 last year. That was a 77% increase year over year for their annual reporting fee. Global Payments, they're really strong in the healthcare space. That's a really popular name as well. They have an annual fee that was $499 for 2025. That is an ongoing fee. They've had that for a long time. But what was new last year was an additional $450 fee that they've labeled as an infrastructure upgrade fee, which is crazy because most of the merchants getting hit with that aren't getting any sort of upgrade. Cayenne their annual fee is $169. So these are just like three of about 9 or 10 that we've been tracking over the past year. And we really pay attention to this. When we're talking to a practice, again, it's always fee heavy. So we're typically reviewing statements. We're looking at every line item. We're reading the entire statement from front to back, first page to the last page. So we are looking at these, and that's where we're finding these. Most practices we talk to didn't know or don't know that they're getting charged these. We're the ones bringing it up to them. Hey, did you know you paid an infrastructure upgrade fee? Like, no, I have no idea. What does that even mean? And so we're the ones identifying this in a lot of the cases. Those are just some of the annual fees that we've been tracking. We saw just recently, I think it was 2 months ago, we did a rate review on a client who was processing with Global Payments, and they received a 4.4% rate increase on top of the rate they were already paying, a 4.4% increase. So there's a lot of unusual things happen. And that's what we say. When's the last time you've actually read your statement? Would you even notice if those fees hit you? And most of the time, the answer is no, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, many practices are getting their statement, they're sending it to their accountant, and it's getting tucked away. But really, really dive into your statement because there's a lot of things in there that are important.
That's so crazy. I mean, I know that again, I said this earlier, merchant services, you got to have them, right? Everyone's wanting to pay via credit card for the most part. Patients are paying less and less by check and then even fewer by cash. So you have to have this in your business. But, from my perspective, I work with clients so much on the insurance side and when we're having these conversations, we're already talking about all of the factors that are playing into the net collectible revenue that you have in your practice. And it seems like all of these pieces are just chipping away at that number and it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And then once you go and collect it, you have even more that comes off with the merchant fee. So to have a 4.4% increase is really significant. Are they really posting a lot of this on the statements in terms of like the infrastructure charges, or are they kind of bearing it in? What have you seen in those cases?
Yeah, great question. And it's a combination. Most statements on page one will oftentimes have a statement message, and it's a paragraph. It may be a sentence, it may be, two paragraphs, honestly. And sometimes those new auto enrollments or increase in rate, new implementation of annual fees, they're in the statement message, which most of the time is overlooked because it's rare that there is actually an important piece of information in there. So read that every month. These annual fees, infrastructure upgrade, those are typically hidden at the bottom of the statement. In any of your monthly fees, they'll kind of hide those annual fees. It's just a small fine print line item. So they're all over the statement is the bottom line. They don't make it easy to read these statements, by the way. And especially for, doctors, dentists, office managers, their job isn't, dissecting merchant statements. That's our job. So we know exactly where to look and where to find them. But for most people, you just don't because you're not familiar with the layout of the statement. So they're all over the statement, depending on who that statement's coming from.
And is that something that you guys can help with? Because if they are difficult to read, depending on who the merchant service is, I mean, if you are working with the practice for the first time, I'm assuming that they're trying to get some sort of help of like, this is my statement from last January, this is my statement from this January. Can you tell me the differences? Is that something that you guys are typically able to look at and kind of spot some of those changes?
Of course, and we spot them quickly. I mean, like I said, that's what we do every day. And we talk to practices sometimes. They're going, I don't even know how to locate my statement. I haven't had a statement mailed to me in 6 months. And that's
Yeah.
pretty common these days. At least with us, we set all of our businesses up with an online portal. So our statements are all electronic. They're super easy to find. So not only do we help dissect the statements, oftentimes we're helping these practices figure out where they find the statement. And that's a great place to start. Look at your statement. Let us, figure out what fees you're actually paying, what pricing structure you're on, and what are you actually paying? Again, the rate that you were potentially quoted or the advertised rate isn't usually the entire story or entire picture. So we help paint that clear view of what it is you're actually getting.
That's awesome. Now, you'd mentioned a couple of different kind of pricing models. Obviously, we know about the annual fees and we know that there are percentages for merchant services as well, which again, I'm speaking from my experience because when I first started, especially when I started the conversation with you guys, I very much had the same knowledge about merchant services as most of our customers and clients do have in our community. So, I always thought that it just had to be, either a flat fee or I think there's some like interchange plus rates that are a little bit better. Are there other structures and pricing models available aside from those in the industry?
Yeah, and it gets really confusing when we're talking about pricing because there are many different ways that merchant processors can, charge or price clients. There's primarily three pricing options out there you're going to see. You name two of them, Meredith. Interchange Plus is one. It's probably the most popular. It's definitely the most transparent. We have a flat rate. You've probably seen that, heard of that. The Stripes, the Squares of the world are typically charging on a flat rate. And then really popular over the past couple of years is a new pricing structure called surcharging, not necessarily new anymore. And that allows a practice or any business to pass the fee of credit cards onto the consumer or onto the patient. And so, there's some pros and cons to each of these. It's not there's never a best for every business. The dollar amount or your average ticket, your forecasting, your, predictability of what you're going to pay, all these things kind of weigh to figure out for your particular business, for your particular practice, which is going to be most beneficial to you. Um, If we really dig into this a little bit, Interchange Plus is very transparent. It is going to provide the lowest cost of acceptance over time. The downside is that your costs can fluctuate month over month. And the reason they fluctuate is your card mix is going to fluctuate. One month you might take a lot of debit cards and very few credit. The next month you could take a ton of American Express, which is the most expensive card out there. And so your card mix is going to fluctuate. The processor's markup is not going to change, but your overall expense will a little bit. It's most transparent. We really like this model, Interchange Plus, and it's a really popular one out there. And Tim, feel free
Give a
to
quick
add anything to
analogy.
this if you'd like.
Yeah, I was
Second
gonna say,
rate,
give a quick analogy for that too. Is like what simplified it in my mind is if you could have somebody build you a shed for your house, they could say, hey, here's the fixed price to build the shed. Or they could say, hey, I tell you what, I'll give you the Home Depot receipt for all the supplies, hammers, nails, and everything that went into it. You just reimburse me for that. And then, pay me $500 to go ahead and build it. That's effectively the Interchange Plus model. Pay the true cost of the card and then a processing fee to do it. So definitely the lowest, but you can have some variability because you don't know how big that receipt's going to be. But of course, thought I'd give that analogy. It helped me. It makes sense when I was learning it.
Yeah, that was a really good analogy. I like that. I'll have to reuse that. The other model, and this is probably a really popular one over the last few years, is a flat rate, right? You just pay one rate regardless of the card type, regardless how that card was acquired, swipe, tap, dip, phone order, etc. And so it's really simple. It's easy to understand and it's predictable. So a lot of smaller businesses really appreciate that because they can kind of forecast what their expense is going to be every single month. And you end up paying a little more typically over time, but it's somewhat irrelevant because you just know what you're going to pay every single month. 2.75%, 2.9%, 3%. These are all examples of what a flat rate may be. And so you can really easily forecast and predict those costs. The con on that is it is slightly more expensive than an Interchange Plus, for example. And then you do end up paying a lot more on a debit card transaction under a flat rate pricing model than you would on Interchange Plus. So you're going to spend a little bit more, but the predictability that is there, which a lot of businesses and practices value.
Yeah, and I know we have, from practice owner side, we definitely have different preferences from owner to owner. So I love that you have that option because really to me, it's the option of, nickel and diamond sounds like a weird, not a great phrase for this one. My analogies are not as good as Tim's, but to get down to the penny per transaction is really very cost effective, but it does produce a little bit more of a detailed report when you're looking at your per transaction merchant services or merchant fees, I would imagine, versus like having something like you said that's a little bit more averaged out with a flat rate model where you are paying a little bit more, but the reports tend to be a little bit more simplified, maybe, and maybe a little bit easier to track. So it's really based upon owner preference and really what's more important to you in terms of reporting versus really getting the best possible fee per transaction.
Yeah, good point. And a lot of times we're talking to practices, they could be on a flat rate when we start talking to them, or they could be on Interchange Plus. And sometimes there's no rhyme or reason why. Whatever rep set them up prior just decided that that was the rate they wanted to select or implement. So just because you're on a flat rate doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad. And vice versa. If you're on Interchange Plus, there may be another better model, or it may be the best for your situation. So we come in and kind of educate that here's the differences, here's the pros, here's the con. What's your average ticket? What's your monthly volume? What are your goals, right? Is predictability a goal or is profitability the goal, right? And that can help dictate what pricing structure may be better for you. So we come in and kind of take the whole list. Again, I'll probably say this a couple times throughout the conversation, but we want a big picture, not just what did you pay, what is the rate, but why did you pay it? What are your short-term goals? What are your long-term goals? And that all comes into play when we're talking about pricing for a business and a practice.
One of the bigger, I guess, adjustments that's going on is the ability to surcharge. And that would probably be like the last pricing model to really consider. And, from a practice standpoint, it's really beneficial. I mean, it's imagine if your credit card processing fees just completely disappeared from your P&L, and you just really learn, okay, am I comfortable having a additional fee that a patient's going to pay whenever they process a credit card? And sometimes that feels almost like unfair. I don't want to push that onto a patient. However, if you think about it, like patients are always paying for credit card processing costs because you have to build that into your practice's profit margin. The real thing we're doing is just when there is a surcharge, is you're giving somebody the ability to choose, okay, if I pay with the credit card, am I comfortable paying just a little bit more, around a 3% fee to be able to have that convenience, or would I rather pay with a different form of payment and not pay that fee? So it's really giving the patient a choice. And it's something that we're seeing more and more practices feel comfortable adopting, because I think in a post-COVID environment, it's really become more of a norm to pay for these credit card processing fees. And oftentimes that means that 70, 80, or even 90% of the credit card fees that a practice might be paying is now been eliminated. It's been kind of passed on to the patients in small increments, and could be the right decision for that practice. So that's kind of the third one. I always say, hey, if you're looking for the lowest term cost long term and you're okay with some month to month fluctuations, Interchange Plus is probably your best option. If you really want predictability, then I would go with that flat rate model. And then again, surcharging, it's a business decision. Do we feel comfortable passing that on? And if so, then hey, that's a great way to have a win-win for everyone.
Yeah.
And as far as the surcharging goes, it just to kind of help take some of the questions out of that as well, because I don't believe that surcharging across the board in the United States is available yet. So on a per state basis, are you guys able to provide some guidance to practices depending on where they're located so they can know if that's an option for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's legal in most states except for Connecticut, Massachusetts, I think it's Maine, New York, and
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico. Yeah. So if you're in one of those states, it's not available. But for the majority of others, with the proper guidelines that we always make sure our practice is set up, it is legal to be able to have surcharging available to them.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I know there's usually quite a bit of questions around like, are we allowed to do that? I think healthcare is kind of one of those enigmas where it's like, okay, what can you actually do with patient care? And if it has to do with surcharging, especially, I say this because when insurance gets involved, it's always like, what can we do to recoup costs in whatever way possible? So that's super helpful to know that they have some guidelines to point them in the right direction, and that they're not, stepping into something that may not be appropriate for their state or appropriate for the patient, that kind of thing. I think that's really, really helpful from the
Yeah,
practice.
and I want to add something there, Meredith. We're not a take it or leave it type of company. So if you want to try surcharging and we set you up with it, and 6 months down the road you have a lot of unhappy patients, you're not stuck with that forever. You can always revert back to Interchange Plus, and same for the other pricing methodologies as well. If Interchange Plus isn't it, if flat rate isn't it, you can always have the ability to kind of revert back to another pricing method. At least with us, that's how we operate. I believe most other companies will, for the most part, allow you to change here and there.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's nice to have a little bit of that forgiveness, because I know as you're kind of strategizing in your business, sometimes it's you're solving problems as they come up, and sometimes something might sound like a really great solution, and then you try it out and you're like, okay, I'm gonna have to do something different here. And demographics are so influential for our practices, that insurance and kind of patient demographics and how patients perceive dentistry all very much has an impact on how a practice can implement policies in their practice. So it's really important to have that flexibility.
And with surcharging, we also say talk to your patients. Be pretty transparent that, hey, we're going to implement a pricing model where we pass on that fee. Your patients will give you honest feedback, and sometimes it's better to cross that road or cross that bridge before you implement it. And if the feedback's positive, yeah, maybe we should implement surcharging. But if you get a lot of pushback before you even implement it, maybe you rethink it a little bit. So there's a couple different ways to have that conversation, or make that decision on what pricing's best.
That's awesome. Perfect. That's all I have for surcharging. I think that answers most of my questions. That was definitely a new pricing model to me for sure. And I think, again, it's because in healthcare, you kind of question like what exactly is kosher in the industry and what's allowed. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we can shift into some workflows. You want to talk about that next, Meredith? Because that's really where I get excited to go. Is like, pricing is part of the story, but consistently payments that, it affects your P&L, but it also affects your staff, follow-ups, day-to-day operations. I mean, payments is not just a pricing component. It really is your day-to-day business.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know that we've had conversations before about in-person transactions, which I think is most commonly what we associate merchant services with, right? If patient comes to us, they check out, and then we're able to process that payment for, date of service, whatever it is we need to do for that patient in that moment. But so much of merchant services expands into the interactions that happen after as well, especially if you're a practice that accepts insurance. So you may be waiting on certain balances to come back and get paid in your practice, and it's totally possible. Insurance is going to pay, 90% of the time in a way you don't expect. So patients have balances remaining. I do get a lot of questions about, how can we improve collections? What policies can we put in place to help patients pay off of these balances, especially if they are surprise balances, right? Insurance is very unpredictable. So we could have patients with 300, 400, 500 plus balances that we have to contend with. And if the patient wasn't financially prepared in the beginning, it can be hard to come up with workflows to get that taken care of. I get questions from practices of, okay, well, we can't take $50 payments, we can't extend this out forever. What can we do to help with that process? And one of the things I love about the Blueswipe service is your payment portal. Of course, that's one of many tools you have available, but being able to plan out payment plans for patients is really important, especially if you have outstanding balances to contend with.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is an endo, insurance almost always settles after treatment. And a lot of times the treatment was not planned. So that means that there's going to be this small unexpected balance, and it wasn't like someone was expecting it like you shared. So we have in our portal the ability to have a card on file. And as simple as that is, it allows you to resolve those balances after the insurance process is completed. So now you don't have to mail out statements. You don't have to make follow-up calls. You can handle that really on the front end, and it's already taken care of. And so when it's set up properly, you're going to reduce your AR, you're cutting down on your collection efforts. It's really removing friction for the staff and for the patient, because everything's already authorized, it's handled up front. So that's a big one. I think also, I know, like you were sharing, the short-term payment plans has been something that you've really appreciated. And when this treatment happens and it's not expected, sometimes the patient can't pay the full balance right away, even if it's a smaller amount, just depending on their setup. And so, yeah, do you want your staff calling and trying to collect on these $25, $50 balances? Absolutely not. And if the person isn't in a position to be able to just go ahead and sell the balance once it's done, instead of just writing it off, what if you could set up a short-term reoccurring payment where you have maybe 2 to 4 payments once the insurance processes, and it's like a short-term payment plan instead of writing it off. It avoids a lot of, I guess you could say, uncomfortable conversations. You got fewer follow-ups afterwards, and everything's automated, it's documented, it's compliant. So your staff isn't manually tracking payments. We're having to have repeated follow-up conversations to collect the next credit card payment. No one's writing anything down on a sheet of paper with someone's credit card number. It's going to be set up there, and you can set it up for the 1st, the 15th. You can set it up on whatever day you want, and it's just going to automatically process. So, I mean, I think that it's a win, and it's not just collecting faster. It's the fewer follow-ups, the fewer awkward conversations, and at the end of the day, you're getting more of your payments in-house. And that's where it's like these workflows are so instrumental. Yes, cost is important because you don't want margin that you're not even having visibility around going out the door and it really affecting your P&L. But at the same time, if you can capture more revenue by having card on file, short-term payment plans, again, and also just your staff's time not tied up. And I think there's also an emotional piece that when someone's having to call someone to collect a payment, I mean, a lot of people, at least I don't like making phone calls like that. And it can be really awkward for the staff as well. So I think just for everyone involved, patient, staff, and then of course, efficiency, it's all built in right there. So that's one of the big workflows that we talk about is like, whether it's with us or any payments company, can you get a short-term payment plan set up? And then can you also have card and file? And I think one of the there's a third workflow that we talk a lot about, and that is really, can you also get your payments integrated to your practice management software? And happy to talk more about that. But those are the three things that like we always start getting into. It's like, okay, have you really built an engine that can fly the plane?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know for sure we've had conversations with customers before about, okay, is there like a manual way that I can do payment plans? So if we end up with this unexpected balance and we need to work with a patient to try and get it paid off, what can we do? And you can absolutely store the patient's card in dental EMR. You could set a scheduled reminder to run it. But the problem with that is even though even just dental EMR or any other practice management service could be HIPAA compliant, we're not PCI compliant. We're not PCI compliant as a merchant service. So there is risk that you have a full credit card exposed to staff members, right? That's the practice's risk and liability. But then also it's a manual touch point. Like you said, Tim, this is something where you're paying staff to have to physically touch this workflow every single time it comes due if they see the calendar reminder. And then if you don't have the credit card built into an automated system, your only recourse at that point is to type it in. So if you are familiar with typing in a credit card to a merchant terminal, that's now considered card not present, which is typically a higher percentage because it's a liability on the credit card company. Someone could be fraudulently typing in information. So all these components, like while they work, they're not ideal, right? There are some liabilities involved. And if you want to automate this process and just make sure that you can implement those processes, it is definitely safer to have it in a compliant portal that basically walks you through that workflow because you're specialized to do it. So that's extremely helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's peace of mind too. I feel like you want to know that like your team has got a system in place that all these things are going to taken care of, and you're looking at AR and you're not looking at missed payments. And again, the patient experience is I think so important as well, just because people, at the end of the day, it's still a reputation business, and you want people leaving with this great experience, even when they couldn't pay a full balance, and they're always going to appreciate that as well.
Yeah, Tim, I think that's a good point to talk about is the patient experience, right? What's easiest for the patient? If they don't have to walk in to pay a little balance, or if they don't have to pull their credit card out to, give you the number over the phone, that's convenient. I mean, I like that as a patient when I don't have to pull my card out or do that. So convenience is a big thing, and it also encourages or it allows payments to be made, quicker. You're not chasing those outstanding balances for as long. And on the card on file and the payment plans, I guess we'll talk about a little bit is there's a lot of customizability there with, how long you want that payment plan to last. Do you want that payment made the first of every month, every other week, for how long, for how much? There's a lot of customability in that. And then, yeah, the last thing you both talked about was that PCI compliance piece, that it's all secure storage. And then our portal, we may have talked about this, is either access or role permission based. So you can have different users on the portal that have different permissions based on, what their role is. So some people can run sales and refunds, others don't have the ability to run refunds. So there's a lot of different, features that are valuable to just make that workflow really, really smooth.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, I know we definitely get a lot of questions about, how they can automate those processes. And that's really huge. We have several practices who have started to implement a credit card on file policy just from the beginning. So that is, it's very similar to surcharging in the sense that you probably want to test it out a little bit with patients just to kind of see what the general feel is. I know there are some patients that are very against leaving their credit card information on file, but in many cases where you are taking insurance, it is a protective measure for the practice to have a card on file that you could use for any outstanding balances. So having a safe place where that credit card information can get stored securely is really critical. Because again, if possible, you want to make it to where someone couldn't come in and find the whole entire credit card number and nefariously use that for, whatever they want, right? And that could be in perpetuity if it's in the patient's chart, as long as that card is not expired. I guess it's definitely a risk in the chart. So I love having that payment portal option for whether you're planning in the beginning of the patient's appointment or just basically trying to settle out that balance after the fact.
Yeah. As a patient myself, I'll give two quick examples. One was actually after the birth of our second child. I have a toddler, and then we have a 5-month-old, and we actually received a bill after we had done some things for our daughter for $11.36 in the mail. And I remember like this, it actually sat on my desk. I have all my like mail over here that I have to go through for like 2 weeks. And I was like, oh man, I gotta get this thing paid. And I just remember feeling so like feeling silly of calling up a phone number, providing my credit card number over the phone for $11.36. I also had and that was one experience. And then I had another experience where I actually had to go to a dental specialist about 2 years ago, and my insurance was, I thought, supposed to cover everything, and I ended up with a bill in the mail for $17 and some cents. And same thing, if just like there wasn't, I don't think they had a pay online option. I had to call in and provide the credit card number over the phone, which again, everyone's busy. I'm busy. We're running businesses. We're helping, we're doing all the stuff we got to do. And I've got to call in and make a $17 payment. And truthfully, as a patient, I would have much rather have ran my card at the beginning and them telling me, even if there was some notice ahead of time, which I would have been okay with or not okay with, but having to just have that card on file to be able to run that payment and not have to make a phone call to make a $17 settlement. So that being said, I think it is a convenience to the patient as well as to the practice to not have staff tied up having to help with transactions like that.
And one of the things we've seen, and Tim, I know you know this well, but certain practices, when they are putting that card on file, they'll select the amount that patient is willing to automatically be applied to an outstanding balance. So for one patient, maybe $100. Yeah, sure, keep my card on file. If I have any balance under 100, run it. For the next patient, it may be 1,000. But you can set different limits per patient, and then you're kind of helping everybody in that case. So that's an option or an idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'd hate to one up you, Tim, but I got a statement for $4.80.
Oh,
And I think in my mind, I'm subtracting the stamp, I'm subtracting the paper, the envelope, I'm subtracting all the things. And I'm like, once they pay for merchant services, like, what are they getting out of this? Like $1? Like, what are they actually getting? So that actually brings up another question that I have is, do you often have questions about, more efficient ways to get payments out electronically? Like, do you have any suggestions for how to help practices with electronic workflows or even, like payment links or anything like that they could utilize in their practice if they don't want to be on paper all the time or maybe don't have credit card on file policies in place yet? It's a bit off the wall question, but that's what came up.
Yeah, Boris. I feel like I'm answering a lot of questions, and you just helped set up several practices. You want to jump into that one?
Yeah, I mean, both of y'all's three examples right there are the perfect reason that you should have a payment link on your website because I mean, it is. It's, time consuming for everybody involved. There's an expense for everybody involved. But if you have this payment link where a patient can go, the link can really say whatever, you, the practice owner, office manager wanted to say. Pay here, click here to pay a bill. A patient clicks it, enters their credit card info, the amount that's going to be paid, and boom, it's done. Money's in the practice's account the following business day. So it's easy for the patient because, as Tim, you said, the bill set on your desk for 2 weeks because you probably looked at it at 7 p.m. at night when you were getting up from your desk, and guess who's not in the office? Anyone. So you had to wait for business hours to pay. So that's one example where a payment link's valuable that patients can pay 24/7 whenever they're at their computer. Go on your website and click that link. And then on the reverse side, like you said, Meredith, the expense of having to, print the statement, put it in the envelope, lick the stamp, send it in the mail. There's some time and expense in there. So that payment link, takes zero time on the practice's side of things. So the convenience on the patient, the cost savings for the practice is a good reason that a payment link is important.
Well, and I feel like at that point, once you have the link, you can really do a lot of things with it. I mean, whether it's putting it on your website, if a patient happens to go to your website and click there, or you're using that very specific link on billing statements just to facilitate it. So you're not having to call, like Tim, you had to call and make that card payment. But even now with texting happening so often with patients. I feel like having that payment link is so nice to facilitate that into any sort of patient communication that you're having routinely in your practice now, right? Just to help facilitate electronic communication. Of course, follow the guidelines of patient communication as you normally would, but that's what having a link unlocks, because now we have this digital transmission and they can get to it so much faster. And I don't, patients are wanting ease of use. If it's really difficult for them to pay it, yeah, they're going to be less likely to pay it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's another question we ask a lot is, are you offering all the ways that patients want to pay? Can you
Yeah.
text them a link? Can you email them a link? Do you have a link on your website? Is your terminal accepting tap, dip, and swipe? So all these ways that is the norm nowadays for especially the younger generation to be able to pull out their phone and use Apple Pay. I mean, that's what a lot of people do. Can you do that? And if not, maybe start rethinking things that, man, I am making it pretty difficult for patients to pay these days and for us to collect. So it's kind of this big circle that you can just help make easier for everyone involved.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. Well, I'm keeping an eye on time. We're getting close to the 15-minute mark for doing a Q&A session, and I feel like we're doing pretty good on timing. So just want to make sure I do a time check really quick before we move on. I'm not seeing any questions just yet in the chat, but so far you've been awesome at answering my questions. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, 100%. One thing we haven't talked about a whole lot is when it comes to workflows. I mentioned this earlier, but one of the first things that we recommend is having your payments fully integrated into your practice management system, which of course, if you're a dental EMR practice, we have we have a full integration. I think you have another processor as well, but when payments live outside the PMS, your team ends up having to do manual reconciliation. They have to log into another system. Now they're going to have to match deposits by hand, and they've got to track down any discrepancies if any happen. So it's basically taking more time and introduces more opportunities for reporting errors. And so that's one of the first things to look at is like, can I get my merchant services fully integrated so there is no discrepancies? It's all built in. And so instead of having like these multiple systems, which you're always going to have multiple systems, so the fewer systems that you have, then the smoother things can fly, and you're going to have less human error that's going to naturally happen. And so that's one of the first things that we really do recommend is like, hey, try to get your payments integrated if possible. And sometimes we see some really good PMS systems, but then the payments that come integrated are not the best. And so sometimes people have to create a workaround, but if you don't have to, try to keep it all in one. It's going to simplify everything for you down the road.
Yeah, and this is a bit off topic, but still kind of on topic. One of the things that I loved about the devices that Blueswipe offers in particular, and I'm kind of looking at different devices if you're curious about it, is compatibility for different workflows. So the integration piece, right? If you have an integration for like corded, I guess the directly connected terminals, right? It's where it's directly connected to the computer or to the Ethernet, whatever. But now you have options for wireless devices. This is huge for endos because with endodontic practices, this is acute care. We're often seeing patients for the first time. We have an idea what they need, but that story could change once the patient's in the chair. And then we're establishing this financial agreement with the patient. And to prevent the patient from doing all this back and forth, if we want to do same day care, we're taking the workflow to them. So having that integration piece in place where we can also have flexibility with devices is massive, because now we're not just transacting at the checkout desk. We can actually take it to the operatory. Now, there are some practices that might have some sensitivities about that. Maybe they don't want financial conversations in the operatory versus the business side of the practice, and that's totally fine. For those practices that are wanting to expand and be more efficient and prevent the back and forth, that really opens up a great opportunity because those two are connected in that way. So that's been massive. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. We don't talk about the hardware option or haven't yet in this conversation. When we're talking to a practice, we typically do. But yeah, the three different devices we're offering in this relationship. One is that stationary device. It's a pen pad. A client can swipe patient can swipe, tap, or dip, sign on the pin pad. But yeah, the mobile device we have has really been a big hit so far in that it's just wireless. You can keep it on your reception desk if you want all day, but you have the option to take it with you. If you want to sit in the exam room or sit in the reception area and allow the patient just to sit there and pay. So there's some flexibility in that, which has been, there you go.
I have one. I had
Nice.
to scooch over to get it. Sorry, guys, but yeah, it's amazing. So, I mean, I wish I had something like this when I was in the practice. This is a game changer when it comes to transacting in person. I often would have to take the card from the patient, go back up to my desk, transact it, and come back, which even for me was not super comfortable. I could see how any patient would be uncomfortable. But if they're wanting same day care and they're in pain and they want to get it going, this is a great way to just facilitate that workflow. So I definitely,
Convenience, patient convenience, back at it.
sure,
And
absolutely.
the reality is like, if you're in a restaurant business or a salon business or other industries, you think about, okay, the checkout process is like very much built into every decision you make. Is how do we make that checkout process very smooth, seamless, and pretty at the same time, and very customer friendly. And so I think sometimes when we're with our medical clients, it's like that sometimes gets lost in the conversation. Whereas I feel like what you've done a great job of, Meredith, with DentalEMR is bringing that back into the conversation. And how do we let a patient pay the way they want to pay and keep it super smooth and seamless? And having the wireless devices, we're big fans of for that exact reason. And I'm also the guy too that many times forgets to bring my wallet in places. And so all of my cards are my Apple Pay. And so I appreciate anything where it's like, yeah, you know what? My wallet's in my car. Can I just do Apple Pay? And I just, tap it. They can take the transaction that way. So the convenience piece of it, smooth experience, and making sure payments collections happening seamlessly. I just think it's invaluable for a practice.
I can back that up. I've been at dinner and lunch with Tim multiple times when his phone is his only way of payment method.
Yeah. And truthfully, it is a little awkward when they're like, oh, we can, but you're going to have to meet us up front. And it's like, I have to go to the principal's office. So it's like, yeah, I'll see you guys in a minute. So,
Well, and you know what? It's the thing about it too is that there are nuances in healthcare period when it comes to payments. I mean, just the fact that we have to pay for something that is just, so close to our humanity as people, right? That we have to pay for this care. It's hard enough that we have to have these conversations. So let's streamline it as much as possible. Let's reduce the friction. Let's try and, make it seamless wherever we can, because regardless of who you are, it is just a challenge to get payments of any kind in this industry. Practices are businesses down to the nitty gritty of it. We want to take care of our patients as much as we can, but payments is absolutely a day-to-day part of that. And so we just kind of have to build it in the most comfortable way that we can for patients. So, awesome.
absolutely.
Well, we're doing awesome on time. We are doing good. So I haven't seen any questions come in here. I do have a couple of follow-up questions for you, Forrest, if you have some time to go over it. I want to make sure for any of our attendees and also those that are watching the recording, you have some information before we dive into the Q&A. That's just in terms of how to get in touch with anyone if you have questions, if you're not able to stay or you saw the recording and you weren't able to ask questions live. Who can you reach out to? So Forrest, Tim, what's going to be the best way for them to get a hold of your team if they have questions for you directly?
Yeah, I'll take that one. There's a couple different ways. I'll actually give everyone my, number and email address. We have a general inbox, which is info@goblueswipe.com. But I think the best way if you're interested in talking to us about a new solution or on the sales side, at least want a, statement analysis to see what we can save you, want to talk about equipment. My email address is forrest@goblueswipe.com. And that's two R's, FORREST @goblueswipe.com. And then somewhat
And
interesting in our
while we're
industry.
at that, my email is tim@goblueswipe.com. So it's not hard to figure out.
Yeah,
So if anyone's
simple
trying to get
one.
in touch with me,
Yeah,
it's just first name at blueswipe at goblueswipe.com.
yeah.
So not hard.
And somewhat interesting in our industry, every single business owner that I've set up in, I've been in payments since 2009. And Tim was a couple years before I am. Every single business owner I've set up has my cell phone number. So my cell phone number is 804-241-4231. And I know a lot of doctors, dentists, and healthcare professionals really like text messaging because it's easy. So I text a lot. So text, email, phone call, whatever is the best way to communicate. We are completely open to all those.
Putting
Yeah.
Forrest's cell phone number on blast. No, I'm just kidding.
A lot
I
of
do
people
have
have.
the contact emails in there in the chat. So if you need to copy any of those before you head out, you can do that. It's also really good for you guys to know that Blueswipe has offered to do a promo for our attendees who are coming into the webinar and watching this webinar, especially if you're really looking at your costs and your bottom line and you're thinking, gosh, I think this is the time for me to either pick a merchant service if you're a new practice and you're really trying to make the best decisions out the gate, or if you're an established practice and you're thinking, this is my time to make some changes. We're at the beginning of 2026. We could really make an impact here. Getting a terminal, we know, is part of that process. So Blueswipe has actually offered to give you a credit towards your terminal if that's something that you're looking to implement in your practice. Forrest, are you able to speak to that a little bit more so they know kind of what to expect there?
Yeah, sure. So we're certainly happy to do this. The new equipment does sometimes add up if you're looking at buying a new piece of hardware. So we are given a statement credit or a terminal credit of up to $350 towards the purchase of a new credit card terminal pin pad out of those three options that we have.
That's amazing. And just to be clear, I know DentalEMR is hosting this webinar. You do not have to be a DentalEMR client to sign up for Blueswipe. We encourage you to go to Blueswipe no matter what. They're fantastic. They've been wonderful for us and for our customers. So if you are implementing any other practice management system, it's still really critical to have a merchant service, who has your back. So if you're interested in that, you do not have to be a DentalEMR client to get that promo. So I just want to be clear there. Yeah, I think that's it. What did I miss before Q&A? Oh, the recording. So this session is recorded. Obviously, as I mentioned before, anyone who missed out or maybe you came in and had to dash out before we finished, this recording will be on our YouTube page. So I will go ahead and process this and send out an email so that way you have notification that it's ready to go, and then you can watch it whenever you need to get caught up. Or if you have staff members that need to watch this and you want to kind of key them into the decision process, you can definitely do that as well in that time. Okay, what else did I miss, guys, before we get in Q&A? That
I
it?
think that's it.
I think so.
I got it. I got it. I didn't forget anything. That's crazy. Friday afternoons are always questionable. Sometimes forget some things. That's awesome. So I know we've tackled a bunch of questions, honestly, as we've been going on, which has been fantastic. But I think in my mind, I'm very type A. I want to know, what do I need to check first? If you had to give a list of, let's say, I don't know, 5 things, that's kind of like an audit list that a practice would check right after jumping off of this call. What would that look like for us? What would be maybe the top things that they would want to check?
Yeah, I mean, there's not in any particular order. Go look at a recent statement. I mean, that would be number one. Figure out how to find the statement, look at it, and read it all. It's very educational, it's very informative, and so just read every page of your statement. And Tim, feel free to jump in here as well. Your hardware. How old is your hardware? Are you accepting, tap, dip, chip? These are the ways that, patients want to pay these days. So if you hadn't updated your hardware in 3, 4, 5, and we talked to some practices who haven't updated their hardware in 10 or 12 years, it's probably time to start thinking about that. Are you offering your patients all the ways to pay that are convenient for your patient? During a visit, after a visit, the payment links we talked about, the card on file. What else am I forgetting here, Tim?
I would say, if you want to look at your own statement, feel free and, add up, hey, what was the total fees that I paid, and divide it by your total amount processed. And if it's above like 2 to 2.2%, you know what? Get a rate analysis done. I mean, obviously, if you shop it with many companies, we're happy to offer a free No obligation. Let's just give you a quick, side by side comparison. If your payments ran through Blueswipe versus your current company, what would line by line it look like? And that way you can just, get it under the microscope real fast and see, like, is this like a real margin stealer for me, or am I pretty much in pretty good shape? Sure, you can always save $10, but if it's dramatically, higher percentages and excessive fees and just don't need to pay, hey, look at another option. It's an easy way to add some money back to the bottom line at the end of the year. So yeah, I would say if you're above those percentages, never hurts. It's just like many other services you might pay. That's a big one. And then, I would say I'll also look at that AR. I know you were kind of mentioning that for us as well, but like, how's my AR? Are things taking months? Do we have small balances adding up? What is our process? Is there a defined process around that? And would having a card on file or a short-term payment plan, if we don't have those set up, is that something we could implement? And if so, again, streamline these workflows, because your goal is to be able to help patients not get lost in the minutia of running a business. And so I would say those would just be a few additional takeaways.
Yeah, I actually would like to add to that if I can from the practice management
Absolutely.
side. But Tim, I think you stole my thunder a little bit because you already talked about AR. We're February 6th, which is odd. That's so crazy that we're already in February. But first of the year is always a great time for practice managers to do housekeeping. This is where we take a look at last year and we figure out what worked, what didn't work, and make adjustments accordingly. Like typically that would involve insurance, right? We do a lot of adjustments with fees and making sure are we staying in network, going out of network, those kinds of things. But the same goes for your internal workflows. Like Tim said, if you do have an accounts receivables that is suffering and you're looking at it thinking, other than writing it off and starting from scratch, I'm not really sure where to go from here. You could create really solid strategies for collections. What would it look like if you cut your AR in half? What would that look like in terms of cash flow for your practice? So if you do decide that you want to start setting up practices for collecting, that could look like starting with a basic policy of we will accept 3 payments. We'll split the balance into 3, and you have the ability to pay those 3 payments over the course of 3 months, or those 3 payments over the course of 6 months, whatever that may look like. Having a clear set policy means that you can actually describe this to your patients in a lot more confident way, and you are more likely to be able to set up a system where you can start collecting on some of those balances that are just gathering cobwebs in the corner. And this is the beginning of the year. It's your time to get things cleaned up. Once you have these workflows in place and you're able to create an actual policy in your office, that's when you can create consistency and not have to worry so much about these things snowballing, because they will. Insurance and AR snowball very quickly if you don't have dedicated policies and people to pay attention to them. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all great points.
Cool. Well, I think that's all we have. Is there anything else that you guys can think of that we haven't covered today?
I feel like we flew through that. That was a lot of information. And yeah, that was a great conversation.
It always flies by. The hour-long webinars, it's always, what all can we pack in here? So it goes by really
You did a
fast
good
once
job.
we get started. Yeah. Well, what we'll do is I'll send out the email again with that recording. If there are any additional questions that you have about Blueswipe and you're not reaching out to the Blueswipe team directly, just hit the reply button on that email and I'll be happy to pass over those questions over to Blueswipe. Who knows? If we get a ton more questions, we may end up doing a part 2 webinar. Don't tempt me with a good time.
And I might add to that too, Meredith. It doesn't have to be a question just about Blueswipe. Any question related to AR, payments, workflows, we are happy to answer those. Just free of charge, no obligation, just to help someone's practice growth be even smoother. So it doesn't have to be something specific for us. Happy to be a resource if anyone needs one.
Well, it speaks all volumes to your service. I really appreciate you guys. You're always going above and beyond to help our practices and our endodontic community. So I can't thank you enough for being here and for taking aside some time in your busy day. So thank you so much. I hope everyone has a wonderful Friday, a wonderful weekend. Go Patriots, go Seahawks. Is it Patriots and Seahawks? Don't quote me, guys.
Yes.
Okay. Don't quote me. Like I said, I'm an SEC girl. So, all right. Well, wonderful. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you guys so much. And we'll see you later.
Thanks, Meredith.
Thank you for having us on. It was an honor.
Bye.
See ya.